Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all having an amazing day so far. So in this video we will be creating a very huge mega mansion in The Sims 4, and I've actually been inspired to build this mainly because of that new life and death expansion pack that came out recently, and it sort of surprised me mainly because it's an expansion pack based around like death and whatnot, but it utilizes a lot of these like modern and contemporary looking furniture pieces, which I was sort of interested in utilizing, mainly because I do really enjoy creating and designing a lot of these like modern houses. And I feel like with a huge home like this, I feel like it kind of made sense to utilize those objects in such a grand and extravagant home that looks like this. And so far we're actually starting off with the shell of the home, which is actually really unique compared to like what I usually build with. And we have this sort of M shape that we have going on right now, which has this very interesting sort of front entrance way as well, which utilizes like a bunch of arches around like either side of like the entrance sort of like way, which is 2 stories, and it just looked really interesting and stood out from the entire home. And we're actually building this in Brindleton Bay, which is honestly one of my favorite worlds to build in, as you would have probably guessed if you've been a member of the channel. I've been building in this world quite often recently, mainly because I just really like the environment that it is in, and I just feel like it really works well for these like very huge, extravagant and grand manors, if that makes sense. And I placed a bunch of these like roof wedge pieces throughout the entire home, as well as like these like half walls to complete the sort of like roofing design that I was going for. However, I didn't show most of the designing of the roof purely because it was just taking a lot of time, and I didn't want to bore you guys with showing you guys a bunch of roofing that's not really that interesting, if that makes sense. And I was actually just exploring with different swatches for the roofing, so we sort of had this like very nice dark color going out throughout the entire home initially. However, I did actually end up changing the swatch as well as the texture of the roofing just to make it look a bit more interesting and match the overall appearance of the home a lot more. Decided to like sort of raise this house on a foundation because I just felt like it made it look a bit more grand and just help with like adding additional details throughout the entire home. And it did also help me with adding this sort of like front porch sort of area, which sort of like is guarded by these very modern and fancy looking concrete balustrades, and it just looked very like grand and extravagant, something that you would see in like a huge manor, which was sort of like the vibe that I was going for, especially because it did match with the sort of like interior design that we had going on with the life and death expansion pack objects. And I did actually utilize quite a lot of like marble flooring and stairs, which came from Get Famous, which definitely helped with like creating this very extravagant feel and look that I was going for. And we did actually change these arches from being the cats and dogs arches to the one from the vampires game pack, purely because I just felt like the vampires game pack one had a lot more detail, and we really needed that for the exterior, mainly because we had this very detailed frieze that went along the entire home, as well as like the windows, which were very detailed, which you'll see later in the video, which didn't really match the very simplicity of the curve that we have currently going on with the cats and dogs arch. So yeah, we did actually end up changing it. And I did also think about utilizing the one from the Love Struck expansion pack. However, that was also very simple and it didn't really fit the sort of like grand theme or like vibe that I was going for, if that makes sense. And here I'm sort of just like adjusting it because I noticed that some parts of the home wasn't as identical or even on the other side, and I really wanted both sides of this home to be sort of like mirrored so that we sort of like get the same design, if that makes sense, especially because we work with these very skinny sort of like corridors that I wanted to sort of make into rooms and feel detailed and like realistic, if that makes sense. And for the front of the home, I actually utilized this oval sort of carpet to sort of create this very extravagant and interesting and unique looking sort of like entranceway, which I actually utilized this very nice and detailed rock spray paint and created these like sort of lines that sort of met in the middle, which I actually placed this very simple looking fountain, which kind of like contrasted with how detailed the actual house was, which I think looked really nice rather than having everything look a bit too like confusing, if that makes sense. And yeah, I just really like the overall vibe that that front entrance sort of gave, which looked very extravagant and over the top, especially with it being like very oversized. And I feel like that oval shape really adds to the uniqueness of this build. And I actually did cover most of the exterior of this home with like a lot of these like very nice hedges, just to make it look very sophisticated, neat and tidy, if that makes sense, because I wanted this home to look like it was well kept, but it was also like this very huge grand manor, if that makes sense. And for the back of the home, we do also have a very nice sort of like porch, sort of like outdoor area before you actually go down the stairs off to like the swimming pool area, which I also really liked. And I feel like that curved swimming pool area looks really unique, and yeah, it just looks really interesting and adds a lot to the build. And I'm also utilizing one of my favorite sort of like spray paints, which is this darker green sort of grass texture, which makes the home look a bit more interesting. Erase tool in like a lighter opacity, just to get rid of like those really harsh edges that you do get when the spray paint contrasts with the original color of the ground, if that makes sense. We do actually have a bunch of these pathways throughout the entire garden area, which sort of connect each part of the home together, which look really interesting. And we do also have a very nice sort of garden area, which I wasn't able to show in the speed build. However, you guys can definitely check that out in the tour, which I have provided towards the end of the video. And I also noticed there was a sort of empty space at the front of the home, which I feel like would make sense to utilize as some sort of outdoor parking area. And I also housed the entire perimeter of that sort of parking area with hedges, which made it look very nice and match the rest of the home. But yeah, moving on to the interior, we're actually starting off with the kitchen, and I haven't actually showed most of the floor plan or me creating the front foyer, mainly because it just took a relatively long time to do and I didn't want to bore you guys. But you guys can definitely check that out as we progress throughout the entire video, as well as like in the tour and in the screenshots. But we're actually starting off with the kitchen, which I sort of like placed opposite the stairway, which I feel like looked quite interesting, but I just feel like it kind of like made more sense to push it off to the side, which we had this like very nice gap, and I feel like it really housed the kitchen really nicely in here. And I just really love these new counters that came from the Life and Death expansion pack. I just feel like it works so well with the wallpaper that we have going on right now, especially with that wainscoted design that we have on the cabinets, which I feel like look really interesting. And I just really like the marble sort of like countertop that we have going on, which I feel like make and add up to like that sort of like grand design that I was and style that I was sort of like going for. And I did also place this very nice sort of like coffee station area, which is off to the side of like that window, which I feel like looks really nice and interesting. And we do also have this very nice sort of like modular L-shaped sofa counterpiece for the main sort of like living area. And this is sort of like the main sort of like compartment of the home. So it's like a very open floor plan design, which I really enjoy doing and creating, because I just feel like it makes the home feel like a bit more interesting. And it's also utilized in a lot more of these like modern homes. And I also utilize that very nice sort of like two-seater couch that came from the expansion pack as well as like these like side tables and just like a bunch of different like small objects, which I feel like tie in really well together, especially with that very nice gold and brass sort of like fixtures that we have going on throughout like either side of the objects and whatnot, which I feel like tie it in all together really well. And I also wanted to utilize a lot of color in this build, so you might have noticed right now we do actually have quite a lot of like black and white designs going on, but this does actually end up changing, mainly because I just really fell in love with changing the dining table chairs to be like this very nice sort of dark turquoise sort of emerald green color, and it sort of inspired me to incorporate a lot more colors throughout this entire build, not just in this front foyer but throughout the entire build, because I just feel like it made it look a bit more interesting. And especially since like this expansion pack came with a lot of different unique colors and shapes for all of the different objects, I really wanted to utilize it as much as possible. So we do have a bunch of different rooms with a lot of different like unique color pieces and swatches, if that makes sense. And we did also use that very nice growing together sconce wall sort of lighting fixture, which I utilize throughout most of my modern builds, because I just feel like it looks really nice and it just fits the overall sort of like gold and brass sort of fixture that we have going on throughout all of the objects in the entire room, whether it's those pendulum sort of like lights or the sort of like brass handles and whatnot. I just feel like it really ties it in all together really nicely. And I also really love this sort of like double story sort of like foyer area, which we have this very tall sort of pendant light hanging down from the center of the ceiling, which I believe came from the Get Famous expansion pack. And I just feel like it works so well with this extravagant house, and it's also sort of like the vibe that I was going for with this like very interesting and extravagant sort of like entrance that you would see in these like huge manors, with that very huge entrance of that front door, which I feel like makes it look really nice. And we also utilize a bunch of sort of like seating, and I also incorporated a very nice sort of like statue in the center of like the entranceway, which made it feel a bit more grand, if that makes sense. And I just feel like it really tied in the entire sort of like foyer together. And this is actually one of the only bathrooms that I actually show in this build do seem quite repetitive. However, since this expansion pack did come with a new sort of like tub and shower and whatnot, I really did want to utilize that and the color swatches that it came with, and I wanted to showcase that to you guys as well. So in this bathroom in particular, it's sort of like in the main sort of like entrance way of the home, and I really wanted to utilize this very nice bathtub that came with this pack. And I just feel like it looks so nice, especially with that French fixture that we have going off from the side of the bathtub. I just feel like that looks really interesting, especially with that gold fixture that we have going on throughout the entire home. And I really love this ottoman as well. I just really love utilizing that throughout the entire home as well. I just feel like it looks really modern and interesting, and especially because it comes in different like swatches and whatnot. It just really works with putting it in a lot of different rooms and stuff, especially when using the other modern furniture pieces that came from the expansion pack, which all have sort of like the same sort of like fixtures and sort of like brass color scheme throughout all of the objects. So it kind of like made sense to utilize all of them all together, if that makes sense. But yeah, we do also have a very nice small sort of like office off to the side of this like really huge entrance foyer room, and I just wanted to keep it like nice and small. And I also utilize a sort of like dark color scheme for this room in particular, mainly because I feel like a lot of these modern offices and in these like really huge extravagant homes do utilize these very dark sort of brown offices, and I wanted to replicate that in this build as well, because I just feel like in a very huge house like this you should have some sort of like office space and whatnot, and I really do enjoy creating and utilizing these like office furniture pieces. And since the Life and Death expansion pack does come with a lot of these like office sort of furniture pieces, such as that very nice desk and seating area, as well as like that back sort of like shelving unit area, I just really wanted to utilize it all together and like sort of like create a nice small simple sort of like office space, which I feel like works really well together. And I actually kept the plain sort of like white wainscoted walls rather than adding onto like the darkness of it and creating some sort of like brown sort of wainscoting around it, because I just feel like the white contrasted really nicely with all of the dark objects that we had going on throughout the entire room. And I actually wanted to utilize all of the sort of like corridor space that we had going on throughout this entire build, because we did have a lot of these like very long hallways, but I didn't want them just to be useless. I still wanted them to be a bit functional. So instead, what I did was I divided most of the hallways into functional spaces. So in this case, we actually have a very nice small and simple sort of like laundry area, which I'm utilizing some of my favorite designs in this, mainly because I just really like utilizing the cottage living counterpieces for my laundry room areas. I just feel like it looks really nice and simple, and I really like that sort of like shelving unit with the clothing pegs, which I feel like look really nice and interesting as well, and sort of just like fits the entire theme of like a laundry room. And I also utilized my favorite sconces, which I feel like tied in the entire room all together. And towards the end of the left hand side of the hallway, I utilized most of the contemporary furniture pieces to create this sort of like formal seating area. So I actually started off by placing this very nice bar, and I actually decided to go with this black and gold sort of color scheme because I just really like the contrast that it had, especially with the plain white walls and flooring that we had going on throughout the entire home. I just feel like it looked really well and stood out very nicely, especially with that very nice black pendulum sort of like chandelier lighting. And I just feel like that looks so nice, and it's a very versatile object that you can utilize pretty much in any build. And I also wanted to utilize most of these sort of like storage options that we had from this kit as well, because I just feel like it kind of like made sense to utilize those as well throughout the entire build. And I actually really liked most of the paintings that came in this kit as well. However, I wasn't really going for that really gothic or dark theme, so I didn't want to incorporate a lot of Grim Reaper paintings and whatnot into this build, but I just wanted to utilize a lot of the objects that did come from this pack just to showcase to you guys what you guys are actually capable of actually creating and doing and whatnot, if you guys do plan on like using this pack, or if you guys already have it and want some like ideas and whatnot. I just wish that some of the circular rug patterns did come in a bit more details or different designs that sort of match the overall color swatches that came from the pack, if that makes sense. Because although most of the furniture pieces do match, I feel like the circular rugs and the other options that we have, such as like the rectangular one, doesn't really have all the color swatches from the pack. But I just feel like that isn't really the biggest deal breaker, mainly because you could use the other ones that come from different expansion packs, and I feel like it works. And this formal sort of seating area does actually lead us into this very huge sort of gym area, and I wanted as much functionality as possible in this home, so I wanted to incorporate most of the activity objects in here, such as like the massage chair, as well as like that yoga mat and the general sort of like gym equipment that you would see throughout most of my homes. And I did also utilize the floor to ceiling mirrors, which came from the Lovestruck expansion pack, which I feel like makes more sense for these really huge and extravagant gyms that I do like creating in these huge mansions. And although there's quite a lot of like empty space, I feel like it does kind of make sense for a gym room, mainly because like it is a place where you use equipment and whatnot, so you do need a bit of space, if that makes sense. And I did try to rearrange some of the objects just to make it feel a bit more like busy and filled up, but it didn't really end up working out, so I just pretty much put it back together. But yeah, moving on to the end of the hallway for the right hand side of the home, we do actually have another formal seating area, which does actually end up leading us into the sort of like movie theater area from that double door room. But I wanted to also incorporate the other sort of like sofa piece that came from this expansion pack, which was this more sort of like luxurious looking one, and I feel like it definitely felt a little bit more grand. And I also used the Modern Luxe kit singular pieces of like armchairs to like support the seating area, and I feel like it did work out really well since it did have like sort of the same style. And I used this singular colored rug, and I knew I wanted to utilize some sort of color within this room, so I used this very nice sort of like dark turquoise greeny sort of rug, which I really did actually like the look of. So I wanted to actually change the entire sort of like wallpaper throughout this entire room in particular to sort of have this very rich and dark sort of design and look to it, which I feel like definitely made this part of the home look a bit more interesting, which most of the bedrooms do actually inherit the same sort of like design and color sort of like style from this room, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm just really happy with how this room in particular turned out, especially with that very nice glass table off to the side of the windows and whatnot, as well as like that very nice sort of like fireplace and the very nice sort of like mirrors that we have going on throughout the entire room with that very nice gold outline. And we're actually moving on to the movie theater now, which is relatively small, which encompasses these very nice sort of massage chairs, and we do also utilize that very huge sort of like movie theater sort of like screen TV. And instead of going for that traditional sort of like red curtains, I sort of wanted to make the entire room sort of like blacked out. So instead I used these like very dark sort of like black sheer curtains, which I feel like worked really well as like what I was trying to go for, if that makes sense. And I did also incorporate a very nice simple sort of like ice cream stand, as well as like a popcorn machine off to the side, as well as like adding some extra details onto the flooring so it doesn't look like it's just like a pale white marble, but instead like also incorporating a few like designs, if that makes sense. But yeah, moving on to the second floor, we're actually starting off by furnishing the master bedroom, which is actually in the center of this huge house, which actually has rooms on either side which lead you into the sort of like master bedroom bathroom or the walk-in wardrobe, which I feel like look really nice and extravagant, with the addition of that sort of balcony area, which I feel like is pretty cool. And I'm also utilizing my favorite bedside table sort of design, which is just by utilizing those Dream Home Decorator kitchen sort of like cabinet wall cabinets, and just picking like the thinnest size and placing on either side, which create this like very modern looking bedside table, which I really do love utilizing in most of my builds. And I did also utilize most of the sort of expansion pack objects within this build as well, and in this room in particular, mainly because I just really love the color scheme and the color style that I was going for. So despite this room being relatively simple and like looking a little bit plain, such as like the plain white walls and like the furniture being a bit white and whatnot, I feel like those small sort of like details that you see within like the fixtures, as well as like from the furniture pieces, I feel like it really does tie in the entire space really nicely, because it sort of just like adds that extra color that the room sort of like needs. And I feel like the rugs also do help with like creating a dynamic sort of like room and just like making it look a bit more interesting than it really is. And although it does all look really white and pale, I feel like the different textures and designs really do make up for how simple the room really is, especially with the addition of like the rugs and whatnot, which have a lot of like color and stuff like that. I feel like most of the color does come from the rugs. And I did also try to change up some of the flooring by just like using different tiles and whatnot. However, it just didn't end up working out as well as I thought it would have happened, so I just left it as like this like plain white marble, which I feel like still works out pretty nicely, and I feel like I didn't really mind it at all. And I also made this very nice sort of like checkered custom pattern for the bathroom area, and I don't usually show my bathrooms, however I wanted to show this one mainly because, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show you guys like what the expansion pack has to offer in terms of like furniture and whatnot. So in this case, in the bathroom, I just really love the utilization of this shower, as well as like the bathtub. I just feel like that looks so nice. I just really love the marble effect that you get on the bathtub. And I also noticed how like this bathroom was relatively huge, so I was able to add an ottoman as well as like a double sink sort of situation. And I just feel like that is kind of like realistic in these like really huge modern mega mansions in real life as well. So I wanted to replicate something like that as well. And I also used the sort of like bathroom clutter kit to utilize those and just to make it look a bit more like realistic and lived in. And I also changed the swatches on that as well, just to make it feel a bit more realistic and to match the rest of the objects, which was this like white, black and gold design that we were going for. And in the walk-in wardrobe, we do also have a very huge walk-in wardrobe as well, and I wanted to utilize these plain white wall design color swatches because I just feel like it looked the nicest in my opinion. And I also utilized that sort of like basement kit huge extravagant mirror, which is a non-cracked version, which I feel like looks really nice as well. And I was glad that it came in like a gold color so that it can match the rest of the home, as well as like all the fixtures that we're using throughout the entire home. But yeah, moving on to the nursery room, we do actually utilize the growing together crib as well as like the changing room that came from that expansion pack, and we do also utilize the storybook nursery rocking chair on one of the sides of the room, which I just really love the utilization of. I just feel like a rocking chair in a sort of like a nursery looks really nice and realistic. And I did also utilize the dream home decorator modular sort of like wardrobe pieces just to create some sort of like section for the sort of like kids clothing, if that makes sense. So the storybook nursery kit sort of like hanging clothing pieces does also fit in there, which I feel like looks really nice. And I did also add a bunch of like clutter and like some stickers and just like a few details here and there on the wall just to make it feel a bit more realistic, as if it's like a proper lived-in nursery room, if that makes sense, as well as like some extra clutter inside of the wardrobe just to make it feel a bit more realistic. But yeah, moving on to the other bedroom that we have on the second floor, we do actually go with a more sort of like muted greenish color, which incorporates a lot of white as well throughout like all of the furniture in this room. And since most of the bedrooms in this home are relatively huge, we did actually have the opportunity to utilize it as a bunch of like formal like different seating areas and whatnot within the room. So I feel like it really did help with creating a lot more unique looking bedrooms, if that makes sense. And I did also utilize most of the sort of like wardrobes and dresses that came from the pack rather than using the default sort of like dream home decorator one that I usually like utilizing. And I feel like this bedroom in particular just turned out really nice, so I just wanted to show you guys how it looked. And I did also utilize that very nice modern looking desk and sort of like office chair that came from the Life and Death expansion pack, which I feel like looked really interesting. But yeah, moving on to the final bedroom, I was actually really inspired by that sort of like formal sort of seating area that we had on the first floor. By utilizing that really rich dark green sort of color for the wallpaper, I really wanted to utilize that for this bedroom as well. I just really liked how it turned out, mainly because I just love the design that it had on the bed and like the color of the pillow matching the bedside table, as well as like that rug just like being very bright and just like providing a lot of detail and just like a lot of contrast to that really white sort of like marble flooring that we have going on throughout this entire home, as well as in this room. And it just really works really nicely with that sort of like white framed windows that we have as well throughout the entire home as well. I just feel like it looks really nice. And I didn't really want to use my typical sort of furniture pieces that I usually like utilizing in most of my bedrooms. So instead I wanted to switch up a little bit and just like incorporate some unique designs and just like add some few details here and there that I don't usually like incorporate, such as like that very nice sort of like fireplace and that very small sort of like sunken circular sort of like coffee table, which I feel like works really well in these like sort of bedrooms, because although there's a lot of space to add this sort of like seating area, there's also not a lot of space to like add a huge sort of like coffee table, if that makes sense. So I feel like utilizing a small one like that really does make sense. And I also really liked using the sort of like simple dresser rather than utilizing like a huge walk-in wardrobe sort of modular piece from the dream home decorator kit, if that makes sense. And I just really love the utilization of that very simple and modern looking desk, along with that very nice green chair, which I feel like matches the style and the theme of the room, such as like having that really nice green sort of like seat area, but having that sort of like brass slash gold feature that we see throughout the entire room. And we just went around and added a bunch of different clutter and whatnot. And we did also focus on making sure that the lighting also had its own sort of like green fixture on top of it, which sort of just like added that small subtle detail that kind of like makes a big difference in my opinion. And we did also go around the entire house and just like add extra details and just like a bunch of clutter here and there, as well as like seating, paintings and whatnot, just to make the hallways feel a bit more detailed and cluttered, along with like adding more seating areas. And we do also have a very nice painting room, as well as like a YouTube station, which you guys would see in the tour. And we did also add additional furniture to the garden, such as a very nice sort of like outdoor barbecue area. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and comment down below what you guys think about this build in the comment sections below. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel. But thank you very much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.